Okay, we are live here with this live edition of the New Warehouse podcast, live on LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, wherever you are tuning in. Thank you for joining us today. And as you tune in, it'd be great to see where you're tuning in from. If you want to drop that in the comments, or even what you're excited about hearing about today. We are going to be talking about where to find your stuff. And too often in the supply chain, I think we have a tendency to maybe lose some things here and there. And I'm not ashamed to say that I was in inventory control. I was certainly tasked with finding many things, and I probably lost a thing or two before, even large things as well. I was thinking about this conversation and going back in my head and thinking about some times where assets were misplaced or not easy to find. And we had one case where nobody kept up with the records of the forklifts in the fleets, and somebody was like, "Where is this forklift?" And I'm like, "A forklift? How can we lose a forklift?" But a lot of moving parts there, and we're going to dive into a really interesting project here today around assets that are moving, particularly reusable containers. And we're going to learn about that from our guest on the show today. And that is Todd Farwell, and he is joining us from Cummins, and he is the Global Packaging Director. And he's going to talk to us about a project that they've taken on to introduce reusable packaging, reusable containers specifically into their supply chain. We're going to talk a little bit about why they're doing that, how they're going to leverage those. And we're also talking about how are they keeping track of them? Because as you can imagine, with lots of movement and then having to retain and reuse certain things, you really need to know where they are. So we're going to talk a little bit about the technology they're using to do that program and make that happen. And today's conversation is brought to you by Surgere, and you can check them out at surgere.com. So thanks to our friends over there. And I think that's the technology that's enabling this a little bit to happen for Todd as well. So Todd, welcome here to the show. It's great to connect with you today. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing well. The cottonwood is in full bloom, so I apologize for the graveliness of my voice. So,
Cottonwood, okay.
cottonwood, yep, it's getting me. It's getting me.
Yeah, no problem at all. And we can hear you loud and clear, so you're good. We don't have to worry about these cottonwood side effects here that you're experiencing. So happy to get you here on the show, and happy to have you join us. I'm certainly very interested to learn about this. There was an interesting LinkedIn post a couple of days ago, actually, that someone was asking about RFID and how to track different things. And the post actually, had a ton of interest, ton of comments. So this is kind of timely in reference to that. So I'm very interested to hear how you've navigated this. But before we kind of dive into the project, why don't you give us some background? Tell us a little bit about what is Cummins for people that are not familiar, and also tell us a little bit about your role there.
Sure. Yeah. As you said, my name is Todd Farwell. I'm the Global Packaging Director for Cummins. And Cummins was founded in 1919 as Cummins Engine Factory, and we're still headquartered out of the same place in Columbus, Indiana. But we're a global power leader, right? So it's anything from diesel, natural gas engines to powertrain related components. We've got after treatment, turbochargers, chargers, fuel systems, control systems, you name it. And we're also getting into the battery and electrified power space right now. So we got about 19,000 total dealers across the world. And that's across about 190 different countries and territories. And we've got about 69,000 talented and diverse employees. Mm. And they do the great work of getting power generation to people who need it. So that's we're about a we've invested about 1.4 billion in research and development in 2024, of which this program is part of that. And so I'm very happy that Cummins has just a very good outlook on the environment, investing R&D and doing new things. So that's really helped us in our returnable packaging program.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, and interesting to hear about the electric side there too as well. Because
Oh yeah.
I know for me personally, like I see a Cummins diesel on the road, right, on a pickup truck. So that's like my familiarity there. So now tell us about your role there and what you do as global packaging director.
Yeah, so global packaging director is basically all things packaging. And so I cover anything from what we call the Center of Excellence activities, which are global packaging standards for both our first fit and aftermarket operations. I cover new materials, new program implementations, scanning the horizon for regulatory and environmental kind of impacts to our business. And then we've got the engineering side of the house, which covers both aftermarket and first fit. And anything from the inbound material into a manufacturing facility to the final product getting to the customer. And then in the aftermarket, we do the reverse, but we send the parts out to our dealers and customers
Mm.
across the globe. So just packaging for anything on that. Then we've got the returnable packaging program, which is an entity of itself. And it really has grown. We brought it to life about 2.5 years ago, and we've done amazing things. Like right now, we've got approximately what is it, 550,000 active assets tagged and under management in just that 2.5 years.
Oh wow,
So
okay,
yeah, we're
that's a lot.
really cranking along on that, and it's a fantastic story to tell for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to dive into some of that story here. And I think it's interesting because, packaging, we were saying before we went live here, that packaging kind of touches so many different parts of the supply chain. And, no matter where you're moving material, it's in some type of packaging, some type
Yeah,
of container itself to be able to get from point A to point B. And very, I mean, that's a lot of assets, right? 550,000. That's a lot to keep track of. Typically, if you have a disposable package, it's like you put it in the package, send it on its way, you forget about it, right? In a sense, right? But now with these reusable containers, obviously you have to keep track of them. So I guess tell us a little bit about the reusable containers that you're utilizing and what are you utilizing them for?
so it's funny, our initial mandate was to do all just the inbound material into manufacturing facilities. We wanted to cut out that waste, so it would come in a expendable piece of packaging, would go into our manufacturing facilities, the material would get consumed, and we would just literally throw away the the whatever material that was coming in. And it's including metal racks. We've got corrugated boxes, of course. We've got a lot of timber, and then the plastics that support that. So we have a environmental program. It was called Planet 2050, but now it's called Destination Zero. It's wrapped up in one thing. And we've got to eliminate roughly 84 million pounds of packaging waste by 2030. That's our goal.
Mm.
And the only way to do that is to convert all that inbound material into returnable packaging. However, like any other project, once we got into it, it was like, oh, wow, we can do this, this, and this. So all the scope creep started
Sure.
creeping in. And we went into the aftermarket a little bit. We're also looking at finished product into our customers and how we help eliminate that waste as well. So we're discovering more and more and more. But when the project first started, I had experience at this with, I used to be the packaging leader for Caterpillar.
Mm.
Did that for about 8 years. We also converted to more of a returnable piece of packaging. We went to the AIAG standards, had a very limited amount of packaging sizes that we wanted to bring in. So I challenged the program team here at Cummins. I said, hey, let's get this down to 6 pieces of packaging, right? We got 2 bulk
Mm.
containers and 4 hand totes. And we looked at it, we did the analysis, and about 80%, 85% of the total material that was in scope could fit in those 6 pieces of packaging. And I was like, good, let's do this. And then we'll
Yeah.
manage by exception. I am proud to admit that, 2.5 years later, we're up to like 8 or 9 different sizes.
Okay.
which that's not much growth as we
Yeah.
learned more and more and more. And so we initially went into that kind of philosophy. Everything's going to move in a unit load. Everything's going to, have a lid and a skid on it. So even our bulk packaging, we need to have lids because of fire suppression rules. And, the project team was like, hey, we're going to track lids as
Mm.
well as the packaging. And I go, well, that's going to be a challenge. And so sure enough, it definitely was. But we've limited ourselves to those AIAG standard, 32, 30, 48, 45 footprint, be 4 different sizes of hand totes. And that's what we're going to try to stick to keep it simple, but also predictable and reliable, right? People know what they're going to get. And we're able to predict transportation, make good unit loads, good stacking. We're going to cube out transportation, all those great things that come along with a good packaging program.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, and I think it's really interesting to hear about what goes into that, like to understand. Okay, how do we come up with what are the right sizes to utilize? Because you're investing in these packages that are. I'm curious, what would be like? You invest in a container. I mean, what is the expected life expectancy of that?
So we think hand totes can make about 10 years, and we're
Mm.
giving our bulk packaging about a 5-year life cycle. So,
Got it.
and that's based on my experience with Caterpillar and working in heavy industry and how badly we abuse packaging.
Mm.
In the manufacturing environment, it's pretty hard to destroy a hand tote, but it can be done, and
Mm.
it does get done. Bulk packaging, it's a little bit easier to destroy. So we thought about 5 years. At Caterpillar, I was getting 10 out of bulk packaging in the
Okay.
right kind of environment, but we went conservative with 5.
Hmm. Interesting, interesting. Yeah. Yeah, because I was gonna say it's like to come up with the sizes, I mean, that's a commitment, right? If you're gonna
Yes.
invest in that, and you said you got, half a million plus, right, out there. So that, I mean, that's an investment to say like, okay, well, we're saying like these are the sizes we're gonna use. So very interesting to hear how you went about that, and we're able to add a couple more in there, but getting it pretty spot on in the beginning. I mean, only to add, 2 or 3 additional sizes is not so much of that many exceptions, right?
Right. The upfront analysis that went into determining pack size was
Mhm.
pretty extensive. It was like an 8-month project in and of itself. Right. And we took all of our part numbers. We looked at all the specs we had on the part numbers, looked at the order quantities, demand, everything went into that. And we developed our own TCO kind of, or total cost of ownership model
Mm.
to say, hey, is this a good idea to put in returnable? Are we going to save the right amount of money? Are we going to make the right decision? Can we actually affect the change at the plant? All of those things goes into it. We did that upfront analysis, and that's how we determined that 85% of all of our parts could actually fit into 6 different sizes.
Interesting, interesting. So the data doesn't lie, right? We say that a lot here on the podcast. So
Well, the data can lie. I mean, we've hit some minefields, on that, and data is not always accurate either. So,
yeah, true.
but we built that in, and I took a look at it, and I challenged the team to get down to 6. They did, and we went with it, and it's been a good decision
Nice,
so
nice.
far.
So I mean, some of the driving factors that you mentioned in there, like one was certainly, a lot of waste potentially, right, on the disposable packaging, right? You mentioned
Mhm.
that, there's timbers, there's cardboard, there's probably other wrap or dunnage or something of that nature. So obviously reducing the amount of waste there. But then another challenge you kind of mentioned in there, the lids briefly, right, is keeping track of these items. So with that disposable packaging, I mean, when you send that out, like we said, it's just, it gets recycled or it gets trashed or whatever the case may be. But with these reusable, in order to maintain and keep up, right, you have to know where they are, and you have to coordinate how to get them to where they need to be in the future to make sure that kind of loop is continuously flowing. So talk to us a little bit about how did that problem, I guess, at first present itself, and what was the thinking around that part of the program?
Well, one of the things again about Cummins is the investment.
Mhm.
Now, that investment comes in terms of capital. right? So it's capital investment. You have to count for those assets. So this gave us an incredibly cool problem to solve when we first looked at this. Was like,
Yeah.
okay, we have to track these, and we can only have 5% attrition over the life cycle of the asset.
Mm.
And with a 5-year life cycle, that meant I could lose 1% a year for the bulk packaging.
Ooh, okay.
And I said, okay. And I looked at RFID, 8-9 years ago, and I was like, no way. I tried it out. It wasn't where it needed to be. And, we were working with the consulting team to get this project up and running. And we found, hey, they mentioned Surgere to us. They had a good RFID plan or high fidelity. Well, I'm a skeptic. I come out of the start small, experiment kind of methodology of doing new things. I said, all right, let's run a couple of experiments with this RFID. 99.7 right out of the gate. It took some tweaking, but I was like, okay. And then we just gradually increased the size of the experiment to look at the fidelity of RFID. And I was shocked compared to where it was 8-9 years ago to now. Wow, we've gotten a lot better at this. And, even now, just 2.5 years into our relationship, we've seen improvements in that fidelity that is just spot on. It keeps growing. It keeps getting better and better. And they come up with new devices, overhead devices, better readers, and it seems like everything's just constantly improving, which is fantastic, because then we improve along with it. Plus, a lot of our feedback through this has helped the company grow and change, to meet our needs as well. So I've been really happy working with the team. They seem very agile and able to really flex up or flex down to what we need at the moment. But the fidelity is spot on. We're meeting our capital rules, which is 2 years later. We're not in trouble with the capital team, which is fantastic.
That's a good thing. Yeah.
But I did tell, when we first started, my program director, he was like, hey, we're going to track lids. And I'm like, you're going to try. And we recently went through a couple plant visits, and I was with him, and I said, hey, man, I've seen a lot of 48, 45s today. And he goes, yes, you have. And I go, I didn't see a lid. And I asked him, I said, where are your lids? And he goes, yeah, that's kind of an issue. So we're looking at probably putting those out of scope, buying those with expense money. And lids are very hard to track, but we've got to have them for virus suppression. So it does track them. They go in the building, but somehow we don't know what happens to them after they go in the building. So we've got our packaging technicians on site kind of looking for those lids to try to do some recovery.
Interesting. So so if there's any lid detectives in the audience, reach out to Todd. But yeah, I think it's very. So I'm curious in the project scope. So when you started and you said, okay, we're going to do these reusable containers, get rid of the disposable packaging and containers. Now, was the idea of tracking with technology like the RFID, was that in the initial project scope, or was this, okay, we started to implement and then we realized like we need something better to track?
Yeah, it was there from the beginning, and that's mainly based on my experience with my past company. I was just like, wow, there was, when we'd have big spikes in demand, we would be short sometimes 240,000 pieces of packaging on a day-to-day basis.
Oh wow, that's awesome.
And I couldn't tell you where they were, right? Yeah. And we had other tracking programs, very manual, and they tracked via the herd. So you kind of knew where the herd might be, but I still had to send people in every quarter and count packaging by hand to do inventory control. It just was not great, and it didn't provide me the flexibility I needed to really meet demand, forecast demand, know where my packaging really was. And so coming into this, coming here, I knew we had to have technology, and I knew it was going to have to be the most cutting edge, the best technology we can get our hands on to help us track these things. We just had to do it that from the beginning. We didn't move forward without technology being a partner in that.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, it's interesting, and I think smart. Obviously, I can imagine, like you said in your previous role there, that tracking that could get out of control pretty quickly. And like you said, I mean, that's a lot to not be able to really understand exactly where it is at any time. So, were there any other technologies that you were considering besides RFID, or was it RFID kind of right away?
I consider everything all the time, and that's my mind is never closed, which according to the project team can be a little bad, right? Because I'm kind of scatterbrained that way, but I'm always looking for the next best thing or something,
Mhm.
the new killer app or whatever. But we did, we looked at manual barcode scanning, we looked at, GPS, we looked at RFID, we looked at going without, and one of the things I knew was going to be an issue was I had to have tracking at suppliers.
Yeah.
In a lot of returnable packaging programs, the supplier is a huge, huge black hole. It
Mm.
goes in. You don't know if they ran a 6-month lot to maximize their machine time, ran a 6-month lot of whatever material they produced for you, then put it up in your packaging and just delivered it to us when they needed it. You don't know those things. In my experience at Caterpillar, I was like, man, that was a problem because our
Mm.
suppliers just, I'd go in there and they'd have competitor parts in our packaging. All sorts of things happen. And so I wanted to eliminate that. And I thought, okay, I need tracking at suppliers. Man, that's got to be autonomous, or they're going to charge us for the labor, all those kind of things. So we jumped in, and I thought this. I evaluated all the technologies, and RFID hit that sweet spot of cost,
Mhm.
performance, um, uptime, all availability. I didn't need real time asset tracking, but I needed everything when it changed status. I needed to know, and that did that for me. So it did everything at the cost we were looking at spending on this. Plus, for the portals, the tags, we can use the capital that we're getting from the environmental fund
Mm.
to help fund that, and so that made that palatable for the rest of the corporation. That the packaging, the portals, and the tags were all capitalized assets that we got from a centralized fund.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
That was a fund set aside by the company, or that's like some
Yep.
government fund? Okay. Oh, by
No,
the
that's
company.
by the company. It's called
Yeah.
the Environmental Fund, and that's helped to
Gotcha.
achieve our Destination Zero goals, which are
Mm.
they're extensive. We've got plastic goals, we've got waste goals, we've got greenhouse gas, we've got light, water, all of that wrapped up into our goals. And Cummins is a fairly leading company in all of this. They're on the cutting edge of being environmentally sustainable in our operations, which is
Mm.
definitely in line with my values. And I just really appreciate that we have a centralized fund like that we can draw from to do these type of projects that otherwise would be too costly, or the ROI is not quite there at the business unit, or even facility level.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a great thing too. And I think obviously, like, just looking at operations in general, like you're always trying to find waste, right, to be able to be more efficient, more effective, and when you can eliminate waste and also have that positive impact on the environment, I think that's like a double positive in that sense. So it's really great that you guys are focused on that. So now tell us a little bit about what did the implementation of the RFID technology look like? I mean, what goes into that, and how did you tie it into with the suppliers, as you mentioned there as well? I guess tell us too, because what does the movement of these containers look like? Because they're going not just to your own facilities, but they're going to suppliers, as you mentioned. So tell us a little bit about that movement of the containers first.
Well, one of the things that we decided early on, we could have taken a facility approach. Like
Hmm.
we've got a manufacturing facility in Fridley, Minnesota. We could have tackled them and did all of their suppliers with their material, and it probably would have worked. But we thought we needed to take a supplier back approach. So we're going to convert 100% of supplier material right up front. And so we had to outfit basically our 3PL and Cummins sites, about 27 of those facilities.
Mm.
We outfitted with these RFID portals at each dock door. And that is that's an upfront cost,
Yeah.
and that's a serious one as well. Because you have to tag all the inbound, outbound doors, and if you don't, you're going to have some leaks and you're going to have some not knowns, and we're gonna lose out on kind of the reporting requirements for the capital. So we took this supplier back approach. So we look at the supplier, we do site assessments, we do the total cost of ownership modeling. We look and see if the ROI that we need to have is going to be there, meaning we're going to replace expendable packaging with returnable that we bought. So we expect some sort of piece cost reduction. And we go in and we have these negotiations up front. We do the implementation. We put portals at their dock doors at the supplier. Now, we don't always outfit every portal. They tell us, hey, these are the Cummins doors. And in a lot of cases, that is indeed correct. But if we see shipments leaking out of other dock doors, we have to be really up on that for the reporting. But we took the suppliers, put the portals there, showed them how to use them. Sometimes they have scan guns. I don't recommend that because, again, that's kind of manual. Okay. As autonomous as you can make this, do it. Taught them how to do, the work in the system, the RFID system to show, hey, shipped to where. We look for that to happen. We have transit times marked, so we can alert us when things don't arrive, all of that kind of stuff. It went into that thinking. So we outfitted all of our suppliers. We started on outfitted all of our Cummins facilities, and then started working on our suppliers. And kind of to date, we've got 32 suppliers fully implemented. We're doing about 60 a year, getting them implemented, and we're taking the highest volume first and working our way down. We've got about 341 total portals installed at dock doors around North America right now.
Interesting.
So, yeah, and it's we have to maintain it because sometimes the portals go down, sometimes the internet drops out. So we've got to be vigilant. So we have an operations team kind of watching over all of those metrics, ensuring that the flows are happening. They're looking for what we call graveyard or detained packaging. When that gets over 90 days, we have to triggers an audit. We go in and see what's happening. Found some load straps in a couple of our boxes that haven't moved in 90 days. So, we see all kinds of misuse. So we got to be on top of that misuse and really, double down on the operational metrics, look at throughput, look at turns, all of those kind of things to make sure our equipment's being utilized to the max and nothing's being truly detained in the system.
Interesting. Yeah. And I can imagine some of the challenges there a little bit when trying to do it with the suppliers, right? I mean, obviously, like, an internal operation, you got more control. You can pretty easily communicate, hey, don't put load straps in there, right? But to the supplier, they're you don't necessarily have that full control, full visibility on site all the time, right? So how was that kind of on the supplier side, getting that implementation going and then kind of creating that structure with them to get used to this new process?
And it's like with every supplier, it's varied, right? And so we have some suppliers that are like, yes, you're saving the environment. Let's go, and they're all in. Then we have some guys that are like, oh man, our packaging is kind of a profit center. We're gonna stonewall. And so we've taken some actual obstinate suppliers completely out of scope. You're just out of scope. We've been working with you for 4 months trying to get this going. It doesn't work. But we have a very step-by-step deployment process, and it starts with the upfront. We do the assessment. We come in, we do the TCO, we do the packaging assessment. We determine what fits into what piece of packaging. We show that to the supplier, get their acknowledgement and their agreement on that. We also look at the downstream manufacturing processes. Does this work all the way through? So we have to take an end-to-end approach to it. Then after the TCO and the analysis, we go into negotiations. And that's where things can kind of take a while. We have something called a container loan agreement. And it says, hey, you can't store stuff. You can't store competitors' stuff. If we catch you, here's the result. If you have detained packaging, you can't do that. Here's the result. And so it lines out very specifically what we're looking, the behavior we're trying to address, and say, hey, you can't do these things. Here's how we expect you to work with our equipment. And we get them to sign off on that as part of the negotiation process. Then we go into implementation. And we call it infant care. We handhold the process for a couple of weeks, make sure everything's flowing well. And then we monitor for success, right? And we can do that because of the RFID. It's a self-healing model, meaning if the supplier doesn't do what they're supposed to, all of a sudden it shows up at our facility and we're like, where'd this come from? And we like track it and look at the backtrack and say, oh, supplier A did not do the right work. We need to go back and have a conversation.
Interesting. Yeah. So I guess it's giving you, I mean, it's not only just giving you visibility to like where the asset is essentially, but it's also giving you kind of that chain of custody a little bit to see like where there's some falters in the process, or where is there like some gaps potentially in the supply chain, which I think is another interesting benefit there. So I'm curious, obviously there's some upfront cost here, right? I mean, not only from buying the containers up front, right, for that, but then RFID, the portals that you mentioned as well. So tell us a little bit about what does the ROI picture look like? How do you calculate that in? Because this is obviously kind of a long-term play, I would say.
Yeah, it very much is. So when we first started, we were very, very optimistic about the ROI, right? We're going to save like massive amounts of money. We're going to go and negotiate and get 2 to 3% of the piece cost out of the cost, overall cost of the part, because we're going to replace the packaging. Well, sorry to report, 32 suppliers later, we're not quite realizing that. And so it's a little bit higher cost than what we thought. And one of the other big costs that we have is a container management center. And so these are regionally based, basically distribution centers that we monitor, clean, repair, store, and ship all of the packaging. And I absolutely insisted on that and the supplier portals. So that's me saying we need to do these things. We also wash all the packaging there, because in a pooled piece of packaging, you don't know if it's going to go, okay, if it goes to a machine shop, it doesn't need to be pristine. However, we deal with a lot of electronic components. Okay. And, there are specs that we have to meet for cleanliness for those. And so it could go to any one of those. So all of our packaging has to be standardized and the same. Well, that comes at a cost as well. Now we're trying to definitely like neutralize those costs. We want to be cost neutral going forward. And we're not quite there yet. We still got a pretty expensive, one of my prime metrics is cost per container that we process right through our CMCs. I want to know what the total cost is. Transportation, CMC, all the fixed and variable costs go into that number. And if it's creeping up or going down is a huge metric for us. And, I've got a target to be at what a cost per piece of packaging is every time we touch it. And so we're trying to manage that number, and then that will help us be as cost neutral or close to cost neutral as we can be. There are some exceptions to that. In Europe, we got the PPWR coming on, and I think that's going to really mandate a lot of returnable packaging use for us. And so we're willing to probably look at cost a little bit differently in that scenario. But when we don't have those rules here in North America, so we've got to be cost effective. So we went from this really high ROI that we expected at the beginning of the project to where we are now. And we're negative ROI right now, but we're improving and trying to trend as close as we can to cost neutral, meaning the piece cost outweighs the cost of the program.
Yeah. And are you seeing, I guess like an overall savings from when you were using just like disposable packaging, or will you a long term? I imagine you will. Yeah.
There's, in the aftermarket, right now we use big Gaylord overpack. It's stapled to a pallet. It's a huge 40 by 45. a box, and we throw all the parts in there and we distribute it out to the regional distribution centers. That just gets thrown away, and it's a pure cost for us, right? So that's a Cummins owned cost. We are starting to implement returnable packaging in that environment, and that's going to save us a ton of money. So the ROI on that one is fantastic. Now, the ROI coming in from the inbound material into manufacturing facilities is not as good. So we're going to have to balance all that, right? And so there are pockets where we just get excellent return on investment. There are some of the big suppliers where we actually see a good enough piece cost reduction where it actually saves us money versus being cost neutral. But then, that is varied, kind of the performance on the piece cost decreases. So we're still a work in progress. And so we're still new. Been going about 2.5 years. And again, with us starting small and slowly ramping up, we're getting to the point of scaling now. And so we're starting to scale the operations and get the overall efficiencies out of our network that we built up. And I'm really hoping that we see some good cost kind of outcomes when we do that. So yeah, but we're still moving through kind of early stages on some of that.
Interesting. Yeah. It's interesting to hear too, kind of how sounds like the project has evolved a little bit, right? And how it kind of unfolds, and some of the things that you find, and what you need to add on and do differently. And I'm curious, through implementing the RFID technology, obviously you get a handle and a hold on where are these assets at, right? But is there any other benefits that you've seen from the technology that maybe were unexpected, or you didn't really know that you could get that level of visibility into?
Yeah, absolutely. We, transportation is kind of the first step, right? And so a lot of loads we ship out in the aftermarket aren't always fully optimized. A lot of our inbound loads to our manufacturing facilities are not fully optimized. And so by insisting everything ships in a unit load, it's stackable, it's safe, it's meant to interlock. So all 6 of our pieces of packaging work together. And so we're able to really start maximizing transportation better. We're also looking at predictability. So we're developing our own forecasting demand tool. And this is great because my program director came over from the planning group, and he's got this planning mentality. So we're building our own forecasting tool that will work with our S&OE process and go, hey, in 3 months, you're going to need this many pieces of packaging at this supplier. So we're starting to deliver with precision, and that cuts out the excess. But we also have a great window into where our inventory is going, how fast it's moving. So we understand better what our inventory is doing because our packaging is now in them. And if we get to a point where, hey, that thing's been there a couple months, what are you doing? We're starting to ask those questions, and we're hoping that we see some inventory benefits. There are also safety and quality benefits as well. So from a safety standpoint, one of the things the aftermarket loves to do is take that big old Gaylord, whip out a knife and cut a big hole in it to pick out of, right? And a lot of times if that thing's stacked and you picking out of the bottom one, you've just destroyed the integrity of that container. So it's a big safety problem, in addition to using the knife, in addition to, reaching in there and maybe possibly getting a cardboard cut. If you've ever had a cardboard cut, it is one of the most horrid things on the planet. It hurts like you cannot believe. Yeah, there's all sorts of safety benefits. We also are, with the stacking alone, where you're able to do better at stacking and make sure it's safe to do so. No more of the bottom pallet is collapsing because somebody didn't load it right, or it's got overhang, or it's got these, they didn't use the right amount of stretch wrap. All of those things can be a problem. So now they've got this solid piece of packaging that we can stack on each other and feel really safe about. The other piece of that is we inspect every single piece of packaging that comes through our operations. And again, this is the importance of the Container Management Center, the CMC. we take out the stuff that's non-serviceable. And what we found is when people own their own pieces of packaging and they send them through the supply chain, they aren't getting inspected like they need to. We just had a near miss where some returnable packaging, not managed by my team, collapsed. And because the bottom one was broken and they shouldn't have stacked on top of it.
Yeah.
So, there's all kinds of safety benefits that we've seen from going to returnable packaging. And then the quality piece too. A lot of our aftermarket operations have to repack. And if we can avoid that by using returnables, we aren't touching that. Turbos are finicky. You handle a turbo, you've got to handle it with kid gloves or you're going to break it. And so every time you touch a turbo, you're taking a chance, and we want to cut out those touches. So we've seen quality improvements, transportation improvements, safety improvements, utilization improvements, inventory improvements. We're starting to see all that come online. And with the RFID tracking in specific, man, we have a clue. We have a window into that supply chain world, right? And I always say this, but the only thing that's really ubiquitous in the supply chain is that packaging is needed from supplier all the way to customer. Right. You have to have it in something, some way to convey that piece of material or that finished product. And if you're tracking that, you're tracking your supply chain. You know what your transportation companies are doing. Hey, why did it take you 5 days to get to this 2-day journey? Why? Or, hey, this went through an unscheduled stop. We had an experiment early on. We had these big pieces of equipment called hydrolyzers.
Okay.
And they ship out in like seven truckloads. I mean, they're huge, right?
Oh, wow.
And we were just shipping these things, and they had all kinds of crazy requirements like, hey, they can't have over 2 Gs of shock. They can't get, freezing temperatures, blah, blah, blah. So we put, also the company we work with, Surgere, we put their GPS trackers on those. They were going over to India. We were able to track where that thing got detained, how long it took. It set outside in New York during a polar vortex for like 10 days. And we're like, oh, that's not good.
Yeah.
It had a 9G shock getting off the boat. And so it's all this data you can use to ensure quality. We also know when customs in India opened up the box, tore open the Mylar lining, all of that. We knew exactly what was going on with that piece of equipment. We knew temperature and all that stuff. So it was just once you start digging into this visibility, you can just find limitless uses for it.
Interesting. Yeah. And I think it's, getting that visibility, I think is such a great thing. Cause I know, there's been several times when I was, working in operations and, you open a truck and the load is like all over the place and you're just like, what happened like on the way here, right? And you're wondering that. So very interesting to hear those kind of other additional and I guess maybe fringe benefits in a sense. And I love the safety one too as well. We have a question here from Damien in the audience. He says, what roles does data quality from RFID play in driving more efficient operations, and how does RFID support regulatory or industry compliance?
Yeah, I think we just talked about some of those, with transportation quality, safety, and some of the other metrics we find. But again, if we start using that data, and I've challenged the project team to start shifting their scope. Like we can do real-time location material inside a plant. We've done some experimentation around that, and we know what direction it's moving. We know how long it's taking. We know if a forklift driver is taking a break. We know those things, so we can actually see what's going on inside the plants, inside our logistics facility. We can look at inventory. We can look at detention. We can look at, lost material is huge. To do our annual inventory, it used to take days. Now we've seen where we can make that take minutes. And wow. Yeah. And so, for us to do a cycle count inside of our 4 walls in a container management center, we wave a wand and we've captured thousands of bits of data, right? And it gets uploaded and we can look at the reporting immediately. And, it just makes things so much more efficient, so much more like I can trust this data, because I don't know how many times I sit in meetings and all we do is sit and argue about the source of the data, the quality of the data. And this kind of takes some of that out, because we've got the proof to back up it works. And then we know that if we take a cycle count, it's verifiable, right? Because we've done the work. We do a cycle count, we break it apart, we do actual physical count, we do the match. And so early on, we did all those experiments to make sure this was efficacious, and it is. So data arguments over. This is source of truth. And once you have that one source of truth, you can start working from foundational changes in your supply chain to do that. So the other part of that is on compliance. And boy, is that near and dear to my heart. So we're coming into an era in Europe, especially. Europe's always on the cutting edge of regulatory issues. PPWR is going to hit us, right? The first labeling piece of that comes into force in 2028. And then you get all of the other stuff that comes in, like, hey, you got to reduce the amount of air in your packages, right? So if you have, like, we all open a bag of potato chips, look in there, and the bottom quarter is it. That's all that's in there, right? And so the regulation is going to take care of that, but that also affects us. And so from a compliance standpoint, knowing where your assets are means you know where they've been. So we know exactly what material we put where, and we're able to report that back for eco-modulation issues, like with PPWR or the EPRs, the extended producer responsibilities, the one that went into force in Oregon. We know exactly how much material we put on the market. So therefore, we know how much packaging we put in. We know what our fees are going to be for that. Okay. And so you're able to drive compliance. Now, I've got another system that we have our packaging specs in, and that contains all the documentation on material content, recyclability, recycled content, all the other things we got to have from a labeling perspective, and also we have to report on. So we're able to mirror the two pieces of information together and print out our certification documents, and there we go. We can comply pretty quickly. India extended producer responsibility, or the EPR law in India, came into force, and we weren't at this level of maturity before. And it took literally 3 people almost a quarter and a half to do 1 quarter's submissions, because it was very manual. Yeah. And so we're looking to automate that as much as possible. And RFID plays a big hand in that.
Interesting. Yeah. Very interesting there, and great question to Damien there. So thank you for tuning in with us here today. So very interesting from you here, Todd, and really interesting to kind of hear about the background of the project, kind of the implementation of the project, and how it's continuing to evolve as well, and some of the other parts of your supply chain that's kind of touching and highlighting too. So now, as we kind of close out the conversation, I'm curious, for people that are looking at RFID, considering RFID for their operations, their supply chain, whether it's for containers or some other type of asset, whatever that might be, what would be your one piece of advice, or what would be your guidance to them as they kind of embark on something that you've already embarked on yourself?
Yeah, I think depending on the size of your organization and their appetite for new things, it depends. But for me, I've worked in some very mature big companies. Right. Hard to do new stuff there, right? And so you have to take a very at Caterpillar, we call them intrapreneurs. So instead of an entrepreneur, these are intrapreneurs, meaning we have to try to start up little incubators of new stuff and give them protection from what we call the corporate antibodies, right? Because if you get in there and if you have a new program, finance is going to jump in. Your ROI better clear the hurdle rate, or you're done. You're going to have people who are protecting their territory as well. And so one of the things I wanted to do with this team was to keep them off everybody's radar at first, and start small, do small experience, because nothing in a big company helps your program along like success, right? And you need to build up those successes and have a record of them, building that competency, being able to take it on, showing how you can scale those small little bits of experiments into a big operation, right? Now we're still working through this here. Admittedly, we're still pretty new, but we're in that point where we're either going to scale or think about how we do something different, right? And my bet would be to scale, because this team eliminated 10.8 million pounds of waste last year.
Wow.
There is no other way to reduce waste that does it in big chunks like that, right? And so we are working towards it. But you got to start small, build your successes, build your business case, and grow with the needs of the business. The other thing I told the project team is I kind of like this Zen, I don't know, kind of philosophy thing, but I be like water, flow where they want you, right? Go where the pull is. We had existing pockets of returnable packaging that weren't being managed very well at all. And we jumped in, and all of a sudden we say, oh, we got excess packaging. Oh, it gets to the supplier on time when we said it would, and we don't run out. Oh, no stock outs, all of these things. So all the metrics improved once we jumped in and professionally managed that piece of packaging. And so, the performance metrics, proving you can at least be as cost neutral as possible, proving out the technology, doing those small things, building, and then finally going what I would call mainstream, meaning subject to finance rules, actual business case. We have to go up to our CFO to get approval to do our program now. We're at that size. And so, we're spending enough money, we're starting, but we're successful. Not only that, we're vital to a lot of manufacturing operations. So we've kind of worked our way into those places, and they're like, wow, this is different. This takes a lot off my plate. One of the things I always say is, give me your non-value added activities. Give me those. You're at the plant, you're supposed to add value. If what you're doing is not adding value to the customer, get it out of the plant. Just get it out of the plant. Yeah. And packaging is one of those things nobody wants to deal with it, right? My team loves it. My team loves packaging. Let me deal with it. And we're going to do it professionally. We're going to focus on it, and it's going to be performing in a way that it hasn't performed in the past.
Got it. Love that, definitely. And I love the get rid of, from a manufacturing standpoint, like get rid of those non-value added things. I think that's like a great thing to say, like, hey, we'll take that on, because you shouldn't be worried about that, right? You should just be driving value all day long, basically, right?
And give me those non-value added, but they're essential, right? I'm not saying packaging is not essential. It's essential, but it's not value added in the end, especially to a big company like us. Now, Apple, people love the packaging. Okay, you can say it adds value, but for us, it really doesn't. And so what I'm able to do is I'm able to consolidate all those non-value added activities into a place and make them as efficient as possible, and just really drive the cost as much as we can out of those.
Yeah, definitely. And looks like we have one last question here. So from a customer satisfaction standpoint, how does RFID contribute to service reliability, delivery performance, and brand trust?
Delivery performance, that's one thing I think we do have an impact in. Service reliability, I don't think we're there yet. Brand trust, not sure on that one. But for delivery performance, we can actually monitor that. We know when it left. We know when it should arrive now, right? Because we have our transit times inside of our system. So if we know when something leaves, we know when it should arrive. We are able to say, okay, did it, didn't it? Did that piece of packaging actually transform? Now, a couple of things it does enable, right? We can track our material into the plant. Some of our plants are close to just in time. We're able to bring the efficiency on that. And so, one of our big customers, Stellantis, in theory, they're automotive, right? They exist in just in time. We've got to exist in that as well. And giving us that reliability, knowing that we're going to get the material we need on time, it's going to get to the plant, we're going to be able to manufacture. That does help in that way too.
Interesting. Okay. All right. And thank you again, Damien, for that question as well. So very interesting to talk to you here today, Todd, and very insightful too. And this look kind of in a real time essential RFID project, and really what that looks like, not only from the RFID and the technology perspective, but also from the reusable container perspective and what that looks like too as well. So really appreciate you taking the time to share with us here today the story of this project, and it sounds like it's continuing to evolve. So maybe we'll check in another year or so and see how it's grown from there. But really appreciate you coming on and sharing with us. And special thank you to our sponsor today, Surgere. That's at surgere.com, surgere.com, which you can see scrolling at the bottom there as well. But they are the ones that provided that RFID technology for Todd. So if you are interested in RFID for your operation or supply chain, you should definitely check them out as well. So Todd, really appreciate you joining me today and coming on the podcast here. If people have additional questions or maybe want to reach out to you, what's the best way to do that?
Probably the best way to do that's on LinkedIn. I'm fairly public there. Just direct message me, or reach out, and I'll try to help.
All right, fantastic. And really appreciate you once again. And thank you to everybody that tuned in today as well. I hope you learned something and took some value away. And hopefully you can find your stuff now too, if you leverage some of this technology. So Todd, really appreciate you joining me and for the insights, and hope everyone has a great rest of the day today.
All right. Thank you very much.